Hello, my name is Spencer Salmon, and I am doing a presentation for animal science regarding if animals should be given GMO feed. Starting off, we'll go into the history of GMOs. Basically, the usage of genetically modified crops began a long time ago, but recently started to pick up and increase in popularity starting in 1996. The main principle behind genetic modification comes from the central dogma of protein synthesis, which goes in the direction of DNA to RNA to protein. Modification of the DNA of crops can create certain desired characteristics in these crops, which are better for farmers. Most crops that were introduced were things such as maize, soybean, cotton, and canola. These crops are typically designed to create increased resistance to many different diseases, insects, or herbicides. Crops are usually genetically modified in order to allow for increased productivity in farms, allowing lower prices for their product and increased profit margins for the farm. In the article by Clayton J. DeVos and Mananon Swanenberg, they explain how crops are examined based on various principles, including their molecular structure, their composition, phenotypic traits, and agronomic traits. These traits are compared to those of the normal counterpart in the analysis to determine if these can be used. If composition is substantially modified, then the crop is typically analyzed in a 90-day trial with rodents to establish safety and efficacy. Overall, these crops have not had huge modifications yet when used for consumption. So moving on to the ethical issues of this topic, one of the main ethical issues is animals may have more issues digesting foods that are genetically modified and different. By modifying the genetics, synthesized proteins may be different. In these organisms, the DNA is located on the chromosome, and certain traits may be specific to the chromosome. So all the DNA associated with one specific chromosome may be attached to that. If editing of a certain part of a chromosome causes latter effects, it may be very dangerous for the animal eating these crops. This is an issue due to the possibility of entirely different genetic code of genetically modified organisms. Genetically modified organisms could also have byproducts during digestion that are different than their normal counterparts that may impact humans. During digestion, certain waste products could be left in the blood and not filtered out by the kidneys, or certain products of the genetically modified crop itself. This could ultimately make it into the mouths of people. This causes issues with the possibility of hurting people by using the genetically modified food, even though it is eaten by the animal. As discussed in class as well, many animal extremist groups exist that may have issues with animals being given genetically modified feed. Ultimately, this can also cause them to react to farms that used genetically modified crops. The biggest concern for these animal rights groups may be the lack of enough research in the subject. Many of these groups also jump to conclusions very quickly and can cause quite a bit of harm. So moving on, we will also look at the sociological impact or the impact that this may have on people and society. The usage of genetically modified crops overall is great for people and can improve the quality of life in many ways. This can greatly reduce the cost associated with owning animals and ultimately price for consumers. By having to use less pesticides and antibiotics, the farm can save a lot of money and be able to sell their animal products at a much cheaper cost. Genetically modified crops also may have less of a chance of harboring dangerous foodborne bacteria that can find its way to animals or people. By reducing the chance of infecting animals, animals have improved well-being and less visits from veterinarians. Animal products also would not be wasted due to contamination. One of the most important things about this as well is the issue with fixed land in the world. The population of the world is constantly increasing with no increase in the amount of land. With improved crop efficiency, animals could have much more land in farms because of less agriculture that would be required and therefore less space associated with agriculture. This could also allow for more land for settlements and people. By using genetically modified crops for animals, we could possibly also increase the nutritional characteristics as well that can improve the quality of life for animals. This overall will lead to improved output and happier farm in general. When the animals are given crops that help keep them healthy, less work will be necessary on farms overall. So, moving on to some of the data, this was actually collected in the paper that I was discussing earlier. So, the paper by Claesen J. DeVos and Mann and Swanenberg also has two figures in the research which were beneficial in proving how safe GMOs in animal feed actually are as well. In the graph on the left, it shows the health effects of different combinations of GMO crops fed to three different animal species. As you can see, there were some health effects on the animals. The most was in pigs that were fed genetically modified maize. So, however, in the second graph that you will see on the right, it shows why these results occurred the way they did. First of all, the data did show an immune response was observed in animals fed GMO crops, but this could simply be due to the digestive system's unfamiliarity with the slightly different crop, not necessarily causing any long-term health issues. The most important portion for people raising animals for production is involving the hematology. The hematology did not show any observed changes of biological significance because this is looking at the blood of the animals. This shows that the GMO feed did not cause any significant changes in the blood of the animals that would ultimately find its way into consumer products of the animal or its products as well. The histopathology portion also did not show any observed changes of biological significance. The histopathology is important because it looks at the actual cells of the animal's body looking for changes. This did not show any microscopic changes through analysis, which is very important for the actual cells because that is the main processes where metabolism and all the important physiological responses for the animals is occurring. Finally, the clinical examination showed no observed changes with GMO-fed animals, which is why that's great. So it's very important that this happened as well. So this was all done by analyzed specialists and all of that. So this was very important as well. Overall, all of this data proves very well that GMO crops are very beneficial for animals as well as people. While some aspects may be a bit concerning, the benefits far surpass the risks of using GMO products in animal feed, at least in this perspective with the crops and the species that were analyzed during the research paper that was discussed in this portion, as well as in some other situations as well, with previously discussing how many important steps that all of these GMO crops must go through to make sure that they will be safe and work well for people. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I will now let my presentation go on to Juan.
My name is Juan Lopez, a member of Group 6 who worked and researched the topic GMOs in animals. We divided the sections within the group members. Most of my effort and research was mainly centralized on current events related to GMOs and contribute some striking pros and cons on this controversial topic. So moving forward into current events. A current event that I found was relevant and connected with our topic was jumping genes could outspeed breed drought-resistant crops. So before I dive into the details, maize geneticist Barbara McClintock discovered this in the 1940s. At the time, it was put aside, it was dismissed and seen as useless or junk DNA, only to realize that this was later utilized to create designer-enhanced crops. It may not be natural, but one must highly consider that they carry more nutrients, grow at a rapid pace, and generate a greater amount of product for the public sector. And basically what this is, what it does, it's DNA that jumps from one location in the genome to another. And this is very important to consider because this can help scientists save several years of research. And it is commonly found in tomatoes that has the potential to accelerate crop breeding in extreme hot weather. It is also present in rapeseed, beetroot, and quinoa, and it also helps those crops better adapt to high temperatures. Over the years, it has been experimented and tested, and the primary goal is to increase genetic diversity in these crops. And the results are quite interesting. The result is a balance that makes jumping genes an important part of evolution and gene regulation. It's a new potential source of new variations. Researchers from the University of Cambridge Sainsbury Laboratory have discovered that drought stressors the activity of a family of jumping genes, Rider retrotransposons, which is known to contribute to fruit shape and color in tomatoes. Dr. Dross stated, in a large population size, such as a tomato field, in which transposons are a random mutation process within the plant, we can accelerate this process to generate new phenotypes that we could not even imagine. So moving forward, this is a pretty straightforward example of jumping genes process. To the left, you see a man who's basically was inserted with a new DNA into his body, and you can see the side effect. It totally changed them. To the right is two methods of transposition, which is one, cut and paste mechanism, two, copy and paste mechanism. So the top one basically is the transposon being inserted. Basically what it is, it's cut and pasted. It interrupts the DNA sequence. The bottom is quite similar, but instead of being cut and paste, it's copy and paste. So the transposon is already there. It simply repeats itself and interrupts the DNA sequence. So the real question lies, should GMOs be experimented on animals? Here are some pros and cons. First, we'll discuss the pros. First one is, it saves scientists several years of research by utilizing animals for testing. A con to that is animal laws/rights are not strictly enforced on experiment and trial. Another pro is it helps predict and prevent new diseases, which put a stop to events such as epidemics and pandemics from occurring. The second con is animals must suffer before humans and the public sector are affected or impacted. Lastly, the pros and cons is they tend to utilize animals whose lives are at risk or animals who cannot produce anymore. And the con is GMOs are not always thoroughly tested. The shortest testing slates were a trifling 90 days. So as you see, this topic is very controversial. It has its pros and its cons. Um, it's all up to the way the public sees it and views it. Um, I strongly believe I side with the pros um, because, like I said, it saves scientists several years of research. I understand it may not be the most proper, the best way to do it, but this really helps predict and prevent so many things from happening in our environment. So here is another list of pros of genetic engineering: production of human insulin. For example, patients suffering from diabetes are not capable of producing enough insulin. So there arises a need for such people to obtain insulin from external sources. With the help of genetic engineering, human genes can be transferred into other mammals for the production of insulin. The mammals like sheep and goat are used as medium, with human genes playing the role of software or the brain containing necessary genetic information for produce insulin. So this is another important example of how genetically modified organisms in animals and crops does enhance the living standard of a human. So lastly, concluding my stance on the issue, I side for. The reason for that is after doing thorough research on this controversial topic, I come to agree that my position is for, but to an extent. I am against those who blatantly fail to execute these trials correctly and in an effective manner. Those who fail or abuse animal laws/rights should be punished. But testing new drugs and enhancement on animals is potent and useful and can help prevent epidemics, pandemic outbreaks of diseases. In terms of genetically modified animals in agriculture industry, this method is not fairly accepted by the public sector and in some cases seen inhumane. But one must consider, without GMOs fed to animals and crops, farmers and the agriculture industry would not be able to keep up with society's demand. Naturally, animals cannot produce and reproduce as fast when given GMOs.